All right, hello everyone. This is Joe Saz coming in live on behalf of BLOCKTV. Today we're with Harry Sudock to discuss mining. All kinds of information there. We're going to hit the basics. We're going to hit some more complicated issues, and more importantly, we're going to try to squash a lot of FUD. Obviously, that's one of the most important things is for everyone to have a firm understanding of exactly what mining is, and to ignore a lot of the more emotional sentiments regarding this type of this type of move, right? So, Harry, without any further ado, please introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Joe, I appreciate the invite. Like you said, my name is Harry Sudock. I'm the Director of Strategy for Grid Infrastructure. We are a New York-based Bitcoin mining company, though we do operate all over North America and internationally as well.
Awesome. So that's actually a really interesting place to start. Is that kind of a thing? Are there let's just put it like this. The first thing that comes to mind when I think mining, and this is actually a fear, right? The first fear that comes to mind when I think of mining is China, right? So it's like, great to hear that you have operations here in the state, also here in the United States. So like, tell me more about that. Is mining is a centralized element of mine? I don't even know if we want to start here because obviously we need a background. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what proof of work mining is, what's the value of proof of work mining, and let's expand from there.
Yeah, so appreciate the question. I think it'll be good for us to level set for the whole audience and start from the perspective of basically a consensus mechanism. So the way that the Bitcoin software fundamentally works is that, you and I send Bitcoin back and forth to each other, for 9 minutes and 59 seconds. And then on that 10th minute on average, what happens is that a block will get quote unquote validated. And that means that a distributed network of computers all over the world is spending their computing power dedicated to validating the quality of those transactions over the prior 10 minutes, consolidating them into a structured data format that then gets propagated out to the network to be validated more broadly. And that's how you're able to confirm that all the transactions that have happened over that prior time period are valid. None of them break a double spend rule. None of them, are empty. None of, they're all a movement of the unspent transaction set at the 10 minute, the T minus 10 to T, that everything that's happened over that time period is appropriate as per the software specification. The piece of that mining represents is the computing power that gets dedicated to the network to validate. So the example that I've heard about this really well was originally, I think, on Tim Ferriss's podcast with Naval Ravikant and Nick Szabo, where they said, imagine everyone around the world has a copy of a 1,000-piece puzzle. It's all the same puzzle. And everybody is spending their time furiously trying to put those pieces together. If you've ever done a jigsaw puzzle, they're really hard and they take forever.
Yeah.
But me as the observer know immediately if it's done or not. So everybody around the world is trying to solve the puzzle as fast as they can. They've got 10 minutes to finish it. The first person to finish it shows it to the class. Everybody around the class is easily able to say, yes, good, the puzzle's done. No, not good, the puzzle's not done. And everybody can agree, which is called coming to consensus in the Bitcoin blockchain network. That's when the block has been validated and the miner receives a reward called the Coinbase reward or the block reward.
Yeah, so not to mix Coinbase with the the crypto bank versus a Coinbase reward being the subsidy, the block reward subsidy for correctly solving that proof of work.
Exactly, lowercase c.
Yeah. So all right, yeah, and the puzzle is actually something I heard something very similar was like a giant Sudoku puzzle where there's a million options but only one right answer, and the ultimate point is that when the single answer is solved or found, that it's such a puzzle that it can immediately be validated across the entire network. So that's really cool to me.
Very difficult to solve, but very easy to know if it's right.
Yeah, that's such an awesome concept to me. Yeah, so is there anywhere that you wanted to expand on that? Is there any further steps that we need to take this?
Yeah. So the next step to understand is how, and it can get a little bit conceptual, which is just that the amount of computing power that's getting dedicated to solving these problems is massive. So
Mhm.
it's 10 times larger than any of the other supercomputers we've seen around the world. The accumulated density of that computing power that is working towards securing the Bitcoin blockchain is truly massive. And so this gets at ideas that you mentioned around decentralization, around the risks or the surface area of an attack vector like a 51% attack, um, different types of regulation that could be involved. It's a big monolithic block of computing power that's dedicated to this one process, and it's done by economically motivated miners who rely on that block reward, same as us, um,
Mhm.
who rely on that block reward as their stream of revenue. And I should say block reward plus the transaction fees.
Mhm. Is our transaction fees in this day and age, post 2017 hype, cycle, are transaction fees like a big part of the business, or are they kind of like negligible?
Um, they are meaningfully growing, is
Okay.
what I would say. So I don't think they're meaningful from a percent of revenue perspective yet, but from a rate of change standpoint, I think they are.
As a miner, does the Lightning Network pose any threats to you, or is that something that you fully stand behind and still believe that there is an like a need for on-chain transactions despite the functionality as the Lightning Network grows?
Yeah, I think the Lightning Network will be an absolutely necessary part of the ecosystem because you will have users of the network who need to make negligibly small Bitcoin transactions and
Mhm.
therefore are willing to accept a slightly diminished level of security. Therefore, they would spend less on transaction fees. So there needs to be a place in the network's transaction capabilities for them. But as far as the economic model and the security model, I think that the Lightning Network enhances, like there's an old adage in tax policy, if you believe in such things,
Mhm.
called lower the rate and broaden the base. And so on average, we want every transaction to have a lower cost, but we want a ton more of those transactions to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're a firm believer that lowering the rate but broadening the base is the best way forward for the network.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that makes the most sense as well. So we have a nice firm understanding. It's a puzzle that's being solved, and then when the puzzle is solved, that is a validation required to add a block onto the blockchain, and the miner receives a reward. So speaking of that reward, as a miner, is that reward obviously it's something that you need in order to stay functional. Now you can't just accumulate all the Bitcoin that you mine. So let's talk a little bit about what you have to do with that Bitcoin in order to keep operations running.
Yeah. So you raise a great point. So I like to say when we talk with investors or we talk internally, we're a boring business.
Hmm.
Plug computers in, we buy electricity, we convert that electricity into a revenue stream via the block reward, and we need to create more revenue than our costs.
Hmm.
That's it. We plug computers in, we run power, and we get revenue. Really simple business. It looks normal, like like you're a townhouse or an apartment building. Instead of renters, we've got block rewards, but it's the
Hmm.
same thing.
Okay. Um, Now, so renters and block rewards. All right. Sorry, my dog is being defensive and throwing me off for a sec. It's okay, baby. Um, Now, all right. So I guess I kind of don't want to be jumping around too fast here. My understanding is all right. So again, I just got distracted. It totally threw me off. We have a foundation in mining. All right, what percentage would you say of the Bitcoin that you mine do you need to sell? Because that's something that I see coming up.
Yeah. So I think it really can vary, and so
Okay.
the key thing is the cost of power. So if I've got
Uh,
5 cent per kilowatt hour electricity, maybe I need to sell 90% of the Bitcoin.
mhm.
2 cent electricity, maybe I only need to sell 50% or 40% of the Bitcoin. Um, that I've mined. So the variable cost in this, everybody kind of gets the same machines. Everybody kind of has the same, fixed costs to house those machines and buy the same racks and, and do all of the kind of normal like data center operations that go into operating a mine. But that variable is where you're able to get the cost of power to. So, we can see based on where, we saw the hash rate drop when, when the price fell out earlier this year. So we saw maybe a 30 or 40% decrease in hash power that's, it's since recovered since then somewhat. But, but we think that everybody who dropped out of the mining game at that point probably had somewhere in the 7, 8, 9 type of power, cents per kilowatt hour. So those folks become unprofitable. They either go out of business or they turn their machines off. Then they sell their machines to a lower cost power operator. And we see, it functions much the same as an open market where, one person's a seller, one person's a buyer. But because we're dealing with, with meat space, it takes time to ship a machine, from Oregon to Texas.
Yeah, of course. Or a bunch of them.
So you're seeing, massive shipping containers loaded up and having to move from the high power cost operation to the low power cost operation. And that's why we think we've seen the hash rate recover is a migration of used equipment.
Interesting. So it wasn't just being tossed out the window like, some of the articles we're talking about in China. They're just showing pictures of almost like seriously looking like they were just tossing ASICs in the garbage, if you remember.
I'm sure there was some of that.
Okay.
But I think that probably wasn't the majority of what was happening. If there's a way to sell these things and recover some of their value, everybody's for profit motivated.
Yeah, profit maximizing firm have to be, right?
Exactly, fiduciary responsibility.
Go ahead.
So that's where I think you're asking the right question about centralization of coins. So I think there's two centralizing, well, maybe three centralizing forces. The first one is that miners in theory could represent a centralization of coin accumulation. And imagine everybody had to only pay 0 for their electricity and they're able to keep almost all of their coins. All they have to do is pay their machines, pay the workers, deal with those kinds of fixed costs, but the variable cost of the electricity, imagine we drop that to 0, maybe everybody's able to keep 80% of their coins from every block reward. And we know that would create a significant centralizing force in the blockchain where a small group of people would be able to control, significantly more coins.
Yeah. So at 0 cost electricity, if there was some billionaire out there and all they had to do was worry about hardware, or even a state-sponsored, attack, like maybe not attack, a state-sponsored mining operation where they're subsidizing energy at taxpayer dollar or something like that. In theory, if they had the machinery, they could really create a massive amount of hash that you're talking about and try to hijack the network or in synchronicity with the other individuals or pools or whatever do the same.
Exactly. So then the next centralization is really around the electricity, like you mentioned. So if somebody is able to get access to a massive amount of energy because they're either a state actor or a power plant decides that they want to jump into this, you would need a ton of electricity, but it is doable, right? Right now it would be doable by a single country, whether it's Iranian oil reserves, Saudi oil reserves, Venezuelan oil reserves, the American grid, the Russian reserves, the Chinese reserves. There are a significant number of countries that have the untapped energy potential to do a 51% attack. The second mitigating factor against that is you need to get the hardware.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Does the hardware exist to if someone from zero, from scratch, like Iran or whatever, what we were discussing with massive oil reserves, said, you know what, we're gonna do this. We're gonna attack Bitcoin and we're gonna double spend, and try to do something like get billions or whatever they're trying to do, right? Well, first they would need the Bitcoin to double spend, so that would be a whole separate topic. But they would need to purchase all the mining equipment possible to create 51% hash. Now, do you even think that that's possible? Like, would they have to like hijack AMD's production and have them produce only for them, kind of thing? Or Nvidia, would they have to like completely hijack a facility that produces the units and then produce them only for one country, type of thing? Like,
Yeah.
how long would that take?
So, we think that being able to go and just pure play 51% attack the network from scratch with all brand new ASICs
Mhm.
would be really hard.
Yeah.
There the number of silicon foundries out there that can actually produce those 7 nanometer chips, two with open floor space that even Bitmain struggles to get, the kind of throughput they needed at peak time. So, the amount, the number of foundries that are able to actually manufacture these chips at scale are a super scarce resource. They're dominated by their clients like Intel and like AMD, as you mentioned. And to be frank, Bitcoin probably doesn't represent a big enough blip on their radar to disrupt any of those ongoing operations that they're already so deep economically involved with.
Understood. Yeah, because that was one of the things that I felt like was a big elephant in the room in that theoretical attack. Is, does the physical supply of the assets needed to attack Bitcoin exist if someone wanted to go from scratch? If any government just said, let's do this. Now we have a different scenario where China has cheap electricity and people obviously are dedicating hash. Well, before we go there, let's talk about the difference between a mining operation, which is what you're a part of, and a mining pool, right? Those are two very different things. Like, so why don't we hit that first?
Yeah. So what a mining operation does and what we do is we buy machines, we source low cost power, and we plug those machines in. And that's fundamentally our business.
Now, quickly, while you're there, is there any secret recipe to mining, or is mining straight up plug and replace broken parts?
I mean, you can make up a little bit of ground around the edges, with the way that you cool the chips.
Okay.
You could try to do some out of the box stuff. They're all riskier. You run the risk of overclocking your ASICs, and so you got to basically say, is a 5 or a 10% increase in hash power per chip worth a greater risk in frying the chip? So, we're kind of the opinion that we'll always do what's in the best interest of the longevity and long-term success of the operation. So we try not to overclock our machinery and we're pretty risk averse with how we handle, that kind of stuff. But as far as like, is the mining algorithm hacked? Do people have huge secret ASICs that we don't know about that are more powerful? And I'm pretty skeptical of all of those.
Yeah, there's no like piece of code you can have on top of your mining operation that secretly does something special.
No, I mean, I think that the fear of that will even continue to diminish as we see Bitmain's hardware represent a smaller and smaller percentage of total hardware. The fear would be, Bitmain is doing they have a big self-hosting business where they host on behalf of others pay them, they mine into their own pool to participate. So so maybe they've got a specification of an Antminer. Like, let's look at just the S9, 14 terahash per second. They're renting that hash rate out on behalf of the hosting, but maybe they have a way to get it to 16. And so they're picking up 2 free terahash per second machine for their own benefit because they basically, manipulated the spec of the machine to the public.
Yeah, I've heard about some insidious potential for for Bitmain having done things like that. Is it good to you? And like, is the imminent collapse or potential collapse of Bitmain good for the mining ecosystem? Does that create competition? Is that going to be a good thing, or is Bitmain going down or slowly going down a bad thing? Like, you have any thoughts on that?
I'm of the opinion that Bitmain is a good company for Bitcoin broadly at this point. I think that the risks that they represent have been pretty significantly diminished. at the time of the hard fork in August 17, you could have said that they had a real chance to create a minor cutover to their longer chain. But I think that at this point they represent a key piece of a lot of people's supply chain, and I'm always against people losing access to the right supply chain.
Yeah, understood. So Bitmain, all Bcash stuff aside, is still, some sort it has a value to the community, particularly mining, and you think that they'll make it through this, and they'll remain a world competitor with mining in terms of producing the goods.
It's an interesting question. I don't know that I'm to say I think they're going to survive, because I think there's real risk. I think that part of it's going to be how are they going to be able to sell off their balance sheet without writing down too many additional losses or dropping the bottom out from the price where the bottom's already been dropped out on Bcash. They hold significant pieces of that on their balance sheet, and it may be critical to their survival to find somewhere to sell that, at pennies of pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
I think the work that Dovey Wan has done with regard to reporting on their situation is the best reporting we've seen out there.
Dovey Wan, I've been paying attention to BTC King.
Yep.
I think
yeah,
is that the same person?
He's great. He and her agree pretty much across the board.
Okay. Nice.
But I know that she's based, I think, out of Taiwan. Knows Jihan personally, has a really good kind of set of inside folks who give her high quality information.
Mm-hmm. So let's take that and jump back into the difference between operations and pools.
Yes. So we plug machines in. What a pool does is they're really a piece of software where folks like me would point their hash rate together, and they pay a small fee for that in an attempt to smooth out the consistency of their block rewards. So the reason to use a pool is, let's say I represent 1% of all the Bitcoin hash power. I'm going to receive a block reward, roughly 1 out of 100 blocks. What happens though if that doesn't happen? That's on average. What if I go 300 blocks without getting my block reward, even though I know that that'll regress to the mean eventually? I'm running a business. We have cash flow, we have payroll, like all of those things kind of need to happen. So the invention that was written into the piece of the mining consensus mechanism is that folks are able to pool their hash rate and then are able to receive pro rata distributions based on the computing power that they contribute. So there, if you've heard of slush pool or ant pool, these are Bitcoin mining pools that have kind of coalesced around this ability to smooth out the block rewards for the participants contributing the computing power.
So as a mining operator, could you also operate a mining pool? Would you have your facility up and running and then say, you know what, I want to run this into a pool and allow average Joes to, flip a switch on their desktop and dedicate their GPU to mining remotely? Because that's essentially what a pool is, mining remotely, correct?
Yeah. So it's in our product roadmap. We're focused on business as usual right now, but we would love to be a pool operator as well. We think that that's an exciting way to diversify our revenue and contribute additionally to the Bitcoin community.
Well, so I see that as an immediate good thing, right? Because some of the biggest FUD surrounding mining is a full-blown centralization scenario in China. We can go into the speculative routes of how China can potentially disrupt Bitcoin, right? And we can hit that a little later. But so right off the bat, does the centralization of mining in China scare you? And if so, why? If not, why?
I think that centralization should always, constant vigilance is the only right path forward. So I am not actively worried about it coming out of China right now, but I'm actively worried about it conceptually all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
So for me, it's less about do I think that it's less about what do I think is likely and more about what is the size of the consequence relative to the likeliness.
Mm.
So I think that whatever we can do to take additional steps to further decentralize mining processes should be taken quickly and aggressively. This is my opportunity to plug the Blue Mats mining protocol called BetterHash, where it actually circumvents the mining pool to get them out of the way of the double spend concept. So in mining, there's two things that happen. There's the assembly of the block header, and then there's the accumulation of the transactions. So in this case, it would mean that the individual pool participant would be the block constructor rather than the pool operator being the block constructor from a content standpoint. So that way, if I were contributing, let's say, to a Chinese mining pool, then I would still have control over making sure that the pool wasn't a malicious actor. All the pool would be responsible for would be splitting up the pro rata block rewards, nothing more.
Okay,
So it's okay to mitigate that.
Yeah, so and I agree with you. I'm not too worried about China doing something today, tomorrow, or a year from now, even. But there is like the conceptual fear of like, there was I was having this debate with some people, and I realized, and they brought up a great point. Like, if I'm going to be attacking other cryptocurrencies and this and that, then I need to address the elephants in my room, right? And this Chinese centralization is like, now before, like, so it scares me a little bit. Now, let's say today China had some sort of secret black ops mission to take over Bitcoin Hash. What would they be able to do with that? Because would they only be able to 51% attack it, or would they also be able to implement some sort of new proposal structure? Would they be able to implement some sort of malicious piece of code into the Bitcoin protocol that would require a vote?
It's a good point. So you're getting a little bit outside my jurisdiction of what I understand. The folks who would be able to answer that best are going to be the core developers.
Okay.
So anybody who's contributing to Bitcoin Core, if bad code gets merged, I mean that's a breakdown in the development procedures, almost unrelated to mining. So
Oh, okay. I thought my understanding of mining was that in order for a code to be some sort of Bitcoin improvement proposal to be implemented, it required a vote from the miners.
No, sir.
Oh, so is that something that you like you said, we're stepping out of your territory there, or is that something you can kind of correct me?
What I can speak to is that the nodes run the network.
Okay.
So consensus relies upon the folks operating full and validating nodes, updating their software in the ways that they see fit. So, if we go back to the puzzle example of how mining functions, let's say you're the malicious miner, and you have introduced bad code into your instance of Bitcoin Core, and you found a block, and you show the block out to us, but we didn't implement your version of Bitcoin Core, and it becomes incompatible via the consensus mechanism, not the mining piece of the mechanism, but literally the networked computers. I'm not an engineer, so we've stepped into what I understand vaguely conceptually, but not at all in practice. So if you introduced a bug or something into your version of your Bitcoin Core implementation, and my version is not updated, and you try to propagate a block to me to validate, I'm probably not going to recognize it because we're running different versions of the code, and the changes that you've made would break what I know to be compatible.
Understood. So I'll actually have to bring that up with in a different time, because that's a really interesting thing. I guess I might have read some information that didn't line up properly. But yeah, so my understanding again was that Bitcoin improvement proposals required consensus through like there was like a block time to vote on a Bitcoin improvement proposal, and my understanding was that miners were the voters. But you're saying miners strictly uphold, they strictly focus on solving the proof of work algorithm, propagating transactions on the blockchain, whereas full nodes do like an accumulation of things, including the Bitcoin improvement proposals process.
Yeah. I mean, you're definitely outside of my
Okay.
expertise, but I know, and I'm happy to make introductions, down the
Yeah.
road, folks who can speak to this more specifically.
Awesome. So the only thing that can be done with mining is a 51% attack. That's the only thing on the worst end of the spectrum that can, well, other than like maybe a death spiral, but like on a state-sponsored attack, the only thing that can be done is a 51% attack.
Yeah, or they can steal coins.
Steal coins. Okay. So do you want to start with like, so let's just say China is having a bad day and they want to flip out on Bitcoin. What could they do today?
They could locate, well, things they could do, in order of bad. They could shut down mining operations.
Mm-hmm.
That's bad because the hash rate gets lower. That leaves a more vulnerable Bitcoin. So the lower the hash rate, the easier it is for someone else to 51% attack. So that's kind of number one.
Okay.
In the list of bad things. The next would be that they take the hash power and they attempt a 51% attack themselves. That's worse. Then and what that would require, if they're economically motivated, maybe they've shorted Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
on their BitMEX account, and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
they're at 100x leverage, and they're just going to short that thing into the ground.
Yeah.
That's one way, but I think that if what they really want to do is break down the protocol, they can 51% the network, they can commit double spends, they can mine empty blocks, you can spam the mempool, you can grind the network to a halt.
Okay.
At which point we would have to look at what block we can still go back to with consensus and fork from there. But these are all really, really difficult attacks to accomplish. They require massive coordination. They require reorganizing supply chains, dealing with the energy sources that the Chinese have access to, and part of what I've learned a bit from Dovey in her tweets is the mining regulations really function almost at like a state level, so not at the federal level, to use the American language.
Mm-hmm.
For what that would be, and that there's really a lot more fragmentation around how these areas are governed, with regard to Bitcoin and mining.
Yeah, so I mean, all these scenarios were the worst case scenarios. There's really only one regulatory where miners are forced to shut down, and that would obviously be bad. Maybe that would cause more people to join mining pools. Who knows, like what would happen, right? Because you can always focus on like everything else stays constant, and we focus on one malicious act. But then you have to assume that, well, if something bad's going to happen over here, then word's going to spread and things are going to change, right? Like things are going to shift to kind of create some sort of balance, hopefully. So, if we're going to enter a speculative space, I always say, well, you need to like kind of look at everything at the same time. Yeah, China might be able to do some bad things. Maybe they unplug. Maybe they get the power facility that's feeding 3 of the largest miners in China blows up and there's no electricity coming to them, right? Well, in that case, hash drops rapidly, and maybe someone on Twitter says, everyone download this software and mine as part of this pool. Bitcoin needs you, and maybe there's some sort of massive move, right? So if we're, like I always say, if we're exploring a speculative scenario, like we have to look at the good and bad and see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I would circle back to a couple of things you said. One of them is the death spiral scenario, which I think we've really disproven exists.
Mm-hmm.
That the likelihood of Bitcoin going into any kind of dropping hash rate, dropping price, death spiral is really low. The brilliance of what Satoshi built is that the economics and the incentives just really work. So we even see that as we went down the drop from 6,000 to 3,200, we saw hash increase, and that's because the miners take time to be sold from high electricity cost areas to low electricity cost areas that are maybe still profitable. And so even if we get caught in part of that cycle, our ability to get out of it is really robust on the Bitcoin price side, on the hash rate side, and then even just on the difficulty adjustment. You only have 2 weeks for the whole cycle to play out.
Yeah, I think what is it like 2,000 something blocks or something, amounting to 2 weeks before the difficulty bomb adjusts.
Exactly. So even then, maybe you see non-economic motivated miners stepping in, turning on hash to push through to that 2000 block readjustment, because
Mhm.
then they'll fall back into profitability at that point. The math and the game theory, kind of plays itself out interestingly once you're in this scenario. And I think that we've seen more options other than price goes down, hash goes down, price goes down, hash goes down. We never difficulty adjust. The
Mhm.
likelihood of that coming out clean is really, really low.
Yeah, because I think the thing that people fail to realize when they're doing these like theoretical attacks is that this is a full blown global competition, right? I mean, I think even if there is some sort of like garbage or some sort of bad news in China, that still doesn't mean that other competitors aren't going to enter the space. Maybe that's exactly what would inspire someone to enter the space, is some sort of collapse or some sort of issue. So, yeah, I mean, this is a global competition, and in theory, this Bitcoin is going to the moon, right? So I understand the incentives for why people would be vigorously competing to accrue and accumulate Bitcoin. It makes perfect sense.
I,
Or were you about to say something?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think about it. If have you read The Three Body Problem?
No.
So it's a great book. Book at Chinese science fiction author Cixin Liu,
Okay.
Cixinliu, and it deals with a lot of this kind of game theory at the science fiction level. But there's one concept that gets talked about in the third book where it's this idea of 3 versus 300. So I think that the crux of it being we constantly vastly underestimate Bitcoin and we constantly vastly overestimate it.
Mhm.
So I think that we underestimate its ability to be a global reserve currency, but we way overestimate. Like for example, I know another FUD piece is the electricity side of things.
Mhm. Yeah, I was gonna get there soon. Yeah.
We vastly overestimate the electricity argument, but we vastly underestimate the power of the currency to be a global reserve. So
Mhm.
I think that we like to barbell, and we live in an era of polarization. Um,
Mhm.
so I think maybe it makes sense, but my advice is always it's never as bad as the worst day, and it's always worse than the best day.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a funny, like that's almost like a life saying, to live by. What you said. Yeah, it's so entering the FUD space. Um, I feel like one of the FUD. So there's so much FUD, right? I think I sent you some images of all these different criticisms, and one of the biggest things would be maybe the amount of electricity used to mine Bitcoin is equivalent to a small country or some sort of thing like that. Now, let's hit that. I think the first thing I would have to say is, well, we use electricity to print the US dollar. We use electricity to maintain banking infrastructure, all kinds of stuff, right? So it's not. I would say it's unfair to criticize Bitcoin as a currency, as a financial instrument, for consuming electricity, even massive quantities, because that's exactly what we're doing right now with traditional banking and traditional finance.
I would even go a step further. So my friend Dan Held, I got this idea from him. He always makes fun of the electricity police. So you've heard, I've heard, you've heard, I know it's out there. Bitcoin is going to boil the oceans. We're
Hmm.
we're going to enter global warming is going to go up 10 times faster because of the Bitcoin network, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, let's unpack that. Really, at the heart of that argument is Bitcoin is not a worthy use of electricity.
Hmm.
That's the heart of that
Yeah,
argument.
absolutely. That's the foundation. Yeah.
Well, is Netflix a worthy or an unworthy use of electricity, or a curling iron, or an ADT security system in your house, or any of the other uses that we as human beings have decided, on a microeconomic individual basis, is a
Hmm.
good enough use to pay the money for the electricity to consume it in the way you see fit.
All these monitors behind me.
And it gets at this idea that do you believe you have the ability to tell someone else that their decision to consume, produce, etc., is right or wrong? And you know, I don't believe that I have the ability to tell someone else that their use of electricity is good or bad.
So on a very on its most fundamental level, no one should have the right to say and criticize someone for their choice of how they consume electricity.
No.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, to make it very clear, as I have in multiple videos, I'm a very free market style individual. I'm very brash. Let's just hit this. You know, like whatever, wherever. Let's throw it all in the air and let it land where it may. Right? Because that's the most valuable way to do things. I don't really like too many systems of control. I think that in time and time again, systems of control have proven that they generally don't work on the long run. They tend to favor small groups of individuals, and they don't do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So,
Exactly.
mhm. All right. So we have that that fundamental argument, and I'm going to agree with you. Even though as a moderator, as an interviewer, I'm supposed to be neutral, but I would say on it from a neutral perspective, I don't think anyone can disagree with that point. So let's move on to the next.
Then let's go further. So we can agree. Let's say, and we'll try to step through it as piece by piece logic as we can. So number one is that we don't believe that we have the ability to tell each other what you consume is right or wrong, what I consume is right or wrong from an electricity standpoint.
Mhm.
The next is that, well, okay, so even if we agree on that, maybe we have a disagreement on the negative outcomes of that electricity. So, okay, maybe I can't stop you, and I don't want to develop a mechanism by which to stop you, but I want to create adequate, you know, societal pressure such that you feel disincentivized to consume the way you used to. And we're not exerting control, we're exerting, you know, a societal narrative. The next question I would ask is all electricity created equal? So is burning a lump of coal the same as turning on a nuclear generator, the same as turning on hydro, the same as turning on geothermal, the same as using wind?
The
So
answer is no. Yeah.
absolutely not. There are completely different supply chains that are related to each of these. You know, if you look at solar is incredibly green on the consumption, on the energy creation side, but not on the installation side. So manufacturing solar cells is incredibly costly to the environment, even though the energy it creates is potentially the greenest.
It's potentially the greenest. It's also technically, you know, it's there are questions of its efficiency, right? Because in order to collect sun and use it as energy, some my wife's an engineer, so she told me a little bit about this. How it's like technically it's actually an inefficient way to gather electricity, but it's also arguably the greenest.
Exactly. So I think that we can now further agree that not all means of energy creation are equal.
Uh-huh.
The next question would then logically follow: what are the mechanisms by which Bitcoin uses energy? Is it favoring coal or is it favoring hydro?
Mhm.
The answer is we don't know. So part of the problem we run into here, and where some of the confusion comes from, is that we have a data problem. So not everybody is saying I use 71% hydro and 14%
Mhm.
current. You know, so we don't have reported numbers in those kinds of ways. But what we can do is say that in the long run, energy is going to trend towards its lowest cost version, because Bitcoin mining is a fundamentally for-profit behavior.
Yeah.
Or the energy cost, the wider the margins. So therefore, in the long run, all of the energy consumption will trend towards the cheapest type. Green energy is fundamentally cheaper than dirty energy.
Yeah. 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 So
Just
we can.
full stop. Hydro energy and nuclear energy is cheaper than natural gas and coal.
Mhm.
I tell you that from the negotiations that we have with energy providers.
Yeah, I mean, it also just on on a basic level makes sense. If I have to build a dam and have some maintenance there, that's different than having to pay workers constantly chipping away at rocks and, you know, throwing those rocks and transporting them and doing all this stuff. I mean, it makes sense on a very basic level that, yeah, obviously it's trending, everything's trending green to begin with. And then, you know, to top it all off, you know, the answer to your question, I do believe that that we're trending there for multiple reasons into a more green energy space.
Yeah. I completely, I completely agree. And we've seen it playing out firsthand, is that the energy deals that we are able to prioritize, not because, number one, we believe in doing what's best for the planet.
Hmm.
That's a value that we have as a company. We also know that what's best for the planet is best for our bottom line.
Yeah.
Because if I'm able to use only hydropower, I have a bigger margin than if I'm using coal or natural gas.
You have a better margin in terms of what Bitcoin you have to keep and which Bitcoin you have to sell.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So we're able to take in more profits the more hydro we use, for instance. You know,
Yeah.
so that's why I think this argument is really difficult for me to swallow. Is that the number one assumption is that I disagree with, is that someone else has the ability to tell me what energy I can or can't consume as long as I'm willing to pay for it.
Hmm.
Number two, that I disagree with, is that all energy is created equal. And number three is that assuming that all energy is not created equal, the lowest cost energy is also the greenest. So that's the way my logic flows. And
Hmm.
therefore, things I'm able to do as a miner, I'm able to develop a hydro plant where maybe there isn't a town or a city yet, because I'm able to monetize it properly and therefore grow the reserves of green energy that would never get developed without the economic model that Bitcoin mining brings to the table. Maybe it's the same thing for geothermal. We've just heard about examples in Iceland about them developing geothermal opportunities simply because they're able to monetize it more effectively and therefore grow the green energy footprint for the entire country.
Hmm.
So, the argument that Bitcoin is contributing irresponsibly to global warming, I would refute at all three of those levels. And we're seeing that come into play in practice. I have a call later this week with a company that sets up mobile units that sit right on top of fracking flare-off energy that would otherwise just get burnt into the atmosphere.
Hmm.
Represent a 90% CO2 savings because they're able to mine Bitcoin rather than flaring the energy off.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and obviously, I'd love to hear more about this as it develops. I'm sure that this space is only growing. I mean, we're 10 years in. I remember getting in 2015. I didn't feel like I was late. Getting in harder in 2017, I felt like I was late. And then now it's after all this research and all this, these amazing discussions, I realize we're still just like barely scratching the surface to this all, right?
Early. And I'll say this directly to the audience. If you are curious about learning more and getting involved in Bitcoin, go and do it. Make the jump, spend your time on it. It is the most fascinating, exciting world I could have ever asked to spend my career in.
I'm gonna second that. I honestly, on a personal level, something changed when I discovered Bitcoin, and I have a very different purpose and probably a very different future than I otherwise would have had slaving away at my desk job that I absolutely hated and couldn't stand. So like, there's a lot to this space, and I think we're still just in the beginnings. Yeah, we might have had a 20K high, and people might feel like they missed the boat on a technical level, technical analysis level. But no, there's still so much space to grow in the Bitcoin ecosystem, arguably the crypto ecosystem. Maybe there's some sort of stuff that can. I don't know everything, and maybe we can find someone that does know quite a bit more about this. I'd love to have that discussion as well. But yeah, so we've hit the electricity argument, and one of the ones that I remember reading most recently was, how could I explain to my grandma that a single Bitcoin transaction consumes like 19 days of power or something like that? But that's not what's happening. It's what's happening is miners are competing for the block reward. A transaction doesn't cost 19 days of electricity, right?
Exactly. So so there's a question baked into there of who bears the cost. So the transactor does not bear the cost of those 19 days of electricity.
Mhm.
The Bitcoin network has already committed to that based on their emission supply schedule. So that's already been baked in and spent. The amount of electricity that is going to get spent to chase the block reward is going to fluctuate based on the price of Bitcoin, the number of miners participating, increasing the hash rate, and therefore the electricity cost of each of the individual network participants.
Mhm.
Yes, that is a lot of electricity, but but that has implicitly already been spent because of the supply schedule we've all agreed on as network participants.
Agreed. I'm just bringing up whatever other FUD I can find. It's really mostly China, and I think we both agree that's kind of something that the public accepts a little more than it should. I can't wait for you to have a mining pool. I'd love to throw some hash there and be like, oh, I'm participating in a global competition that's bringing some of that competition out of what's arguably a very dangerous control scenario. Now, and that kind of opens the door to the 51% attack, right? We just had one in ETC, Ethereum Classic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's weird. I don't want to ever see a 51% attack on Bitcoin, but it did show us that in a 51% attack scenario, it didn't nuke the price like we thought it would. It didn't shut it down. It didn't bring it to zero. And Ethereum is probably ETC was probably a lot easier to probably flush down the toilet maybe than something like Bitcoin overall. So is a 51% attack really the same nuke that it was theorized to be? I think the answer is no. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, my response is let's never find out.
Yeah.
Is the answer. I am eternally surprised by what behavior ends up happening in the wild versus in theory, or even versus an attempted comparison. My job is to turn on as many machines as I possibly can, as quickly as I possibly can, because that's profitable for our company, but also because, it adds a layer of security to the network that we believe in. And I think that, I think that we are unlikely to see a 51% attack successfully executed against Bitcoin, but everything is on the table. We're in the Wild West. So, being prepared and being vigilant is the proper course of action.
Yeah, and I agree, and that is exactly what we're discussing now, right? Just the public acceptance level needs to probably change, in my opinion. We need to stop saying, "Hey, everyone, it's okay. Like China's not going to do anything. They have economic incentives, or this or that, or whatever." I think there should probably be more competition. If I was more savvy, I would say, "Hey, guys, I'm creating, average Joe pool. Let's flip on your double click on this icon and let's run a United States-based mining pool."
Yeah.
So just real quick, just to address the audience here, Crypto News, great to see you. Crypto Man, absolutely, blockchain is in general very big. Good to see you. And Matt Hamilton is the individual I interviewed on behalf of XRP. A very brilliant individual. We had a great discussion to really illuminate some of the issues in XRP. Well, not issues, to educate me and the audience in some of the fundamental elements of XRP and the tech it provides. And so I think it's great to have someone like that here to discuss, and observe some of these issues, right? Now, Matt, if you have anything, bring it up. We just shifted into the FUD space. We had a little bit of background on what mining is, and I think you probably already had a fair understanding there. So now we're talking about FUD. So if you can think of any FUD, we've hit the electricity consumption scenario. I'm pulling up real quick while Harry, I tweeted you a couple messages, and I'm just pulling them up right now. I think it was mostly energy consumption and China's centralization potential. Are there any FUD scenarios that you're particularly aware of, Harry, that I'm not
that you have brought up?
Yeah.
I think that the big point that I would make here is the point is to be immutable and to be digital gold.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a high security spend. There cannot be, the reason why a lot of Bitcoin mining CapEx and OpEx, capital expenditure and operations expenditure are necessary is because you're basically converting those dollars and those kilowatts into Bitcoin, and therefore, the ability for Bitcoin to be an immutable ledger, to be a strong store of value, that capacity for the currency has grown.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Nasir Mamedov was on Marty Bent's podcast talking about this, but Bitcoin is incredible because it represents a very clear conversion of time into money and of energy into money. And that tight relationship between the physical world and the digital world is costly to create. And that's not a bad thing. So I think the size of the spend is a good way to justify the value of the network.
Like to keep it trustless, right? Because and I'm only bringing up XRP because Matt's here and he can obviously comment now that he's here. This this would be a trustless scenario where you're relying on a global competition to accumulate and solve the proof of work algorithm and accumulate Bitcoin, versus a pre-mine in Ripple XRP case where XRP was created, 100 billion total market cap, currently approximately 60% in escrow, currently approximately 20% in the hands of the founders, with really only Jed McCaleb publicly selling. So that leaves about 20 billion XRP in an actual circulating supply scenario, right? If 60% is in escrow and 20% is in founders' wallets, then that means about 20% of Ripple or XRP, I'm sorry, is being traded. And the theory here is, well, proof of work consumes all this electricity. It's all the electricity FUD. Let's just kind of ball it all up. And what we're doing with Ripple with XRP is we're putting it in escrow accounts, and we're going to distribute it as we see fit to best benefit the ecosystem. That would be a trusted scenario against what Bitcoin proof of work is, which is a trustless scenario and a competition.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So listen, there is no question in my mind that centralization has every opportunity to be cheaper and faster. I don't think doing a decentralized Google is an easy or great idea. Guess what? I type something in and I get the right answer. That doesn't work for everything. So in case of money being a speech and being a right and being able to have unfettered ability to interact with it, I would deprioritize speed and quote unquote efficiency in one area, and I think that the high cost to maintain trustlessness and decentralization are a feature, not a bug, and they're what creates the value in that network. And the reason why I think a store of value, accrual use case is viable in Bitcoin but isn't viable in XRP is because it doesn't have some of those trustless immutable features that Bitcoin does. I run a full node here, I run a full node at the office, I'm able to validate them against each other. My ability to interact with the network in a completely transparent and skeptical manner and have the network live up to my standards every single time is uniquely available in the Bitcoin blockchain. And that's not to say that others don't have value or serve other purposes, but in terms of being a credible attempt at an independent, apolitical, global reserve currency, they're the only ones I'd bet on.
Yeah, and so we're obviously going to agree on that. And so we're going to address some of Matt's concerns, which you already have. We're just going to bring this back up so that we can, I can word it and we can make sure that everyone, the audience in the future, understands the English here, because I know that sometimes there's some words and terms that are a little heavy. So what we're going to bring up real quick is, but the reality is, it is not much of a competition, is it? It's just a means for those with existing wealth to accumulate more. And so, Matt, what we were discussing is, in order to mine, in order to be a profitable mining facility, you have to sell Bitcoin in order to keep the doors open and the operations running. And so what we were discussing was, Matt was explaining that there's a trade there. You have to sell, and it depends on the cost of the electricity that you're able to acquire. But if the cheaper the electricity, yeah, you can accumulate a little bit more Bitcoin and pocket that. But at the end of the day, you're still giving out on a low side. Harry, would you say on the low end of the spectrum, you have to sell 80% of your Bitcoin, or what was like the low end of the spectrum in a 2 cents per kilowatt hour or 5 cents or whatever the best deal you can get is?
If we imagine, let's imagine a scenario with maybe like 2 or 3 cent power,
Uh-huh.
plus you've always got to buy new miners.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things, maybe 65%.
So
You
in a best case scenario, we're looking at 65.
35% after all is said and done. And that being said, I've had a number of conversations with investors where their preference for us as a corporate mining operation, they don't want us to hold any. They want us to sell everything.
Oh, interesting.
And they said their feeling is that if they want to own more Bitcoin, our investors, we'll pay them a dividend and they'll go buy more.
Mm-hmm. So in your particular case, maybe Bitmain might have different motives with their capabilities and what they want, but in your particular case with investors, they want US dollar, they want fiat basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the way that we raise money from our investors is that we're a dollars in dollars out company to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they understand that we're not the only crypto investment that they typically make. So let's say they invest it, let's say they've got $1 million. They invest $500,000 in a crypto hedge fund, and they invest $500,000 in us.
Mm-hmm.
The crypto hedge fund is the fund that's supposed to buy coins and make money on the price appreciation of coins.
Mm-hmm.
We're a profit sharing, pure play, revenue, top line, profit, bottom line type of business, normal.
Okay.
So we don't hold any Bitcoin on the balance sheet. That's not the business that we're in. Certainly in the rounds that we've raised with the investors we worked with thus far.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, when you're selling Bitcoin, just curious, how do you do it? I mean, do you have a Coinbase account, BitMEX account, or do you have some people that you like off the counter type of stuff?
We definitely don't have a BitMEX account based in the US. We try not to disclose the operating information, but we liquidate it as we earn.
Understood. So I'm running quickly through the comments. My brain is weak. I can only focus on one thing at a time. So especially when I'm learning. How are you on time?
I'm good.
Okay. Let's see here. So okay. Yeah, so Matt brings up the point. I can't mine Bitcoin here in the UK. I just can't sell it at high enough price to cover the costs of my electricity. So basically, I'm assuming the point here is that, sorry, what?
I got to flip that right on its head. The point is not that Bitcoin's price isn't high enough, it's that his electricity cost isn't low enough.
Uh-huh. So
if he's a motivated miner, he can build his supply chain, he can source ant miners, or through whatever hardware provider he likes, he can open up a business in an area where there is a low enough cost of power and seek that out. But
yeah, so their only point of mining is to profit, and mining serves only one purpose, and that is to propagate transactions to the network. Unlike what I previously had thought was that miners had a say in the future of the protocol. So there are two. Like my understanding was actually broken. As full nodes that participate in that process. Miners are are very different than that. Can you hear me, Harry? All right, Harry might be down for a second. Let's see what happens. We're gonna run this out for a couple minutes and try to give him a sec to reach out and come back in. So yeah, in that scenario, Matt, you would be priced out if you were trying to run a mining facility in your closet and you're paying top electricity dollar. You would be priced out. One could argue, I would say, and further centralize in areas with cheap electricity. Now, that's not necessarily the case because apparently there's, this is a global competition. China might be doing some good with cheap electricity, but alternatively, Iceland's making moves. Harry here is participating in operations specific here in the United States, in New York State, and elsewhere in the country. So as a miner, he's constantly looking for the most profitable place to mine. Now, the point that I was bringing up is mining being its only purpose being to propagate transactions to the network. How how much hold on, I've got to block the hook here. So yeah, I mean we'll hit that when he comes back. I'm hoping that he can find his way back. I know he had a little bit of a blotchy internet connection. So let's just give him another few minutes here before we keep moving. So as far as the fair competition and stuff, I would say, oh, here we go. We're
Sorry
back. Oh, and you look a lot better. The blotchiness is gone.
Sorry, my internet dropped.
Yeah, it happens. Happens. So we're running through some of these scenarios with Matt here. So he said exactly. So I'm priced out of the market, and so again, I think the point that when you froze or when the internet collapsed, it was that mining serves one purpose, and that is to propagate transactions to the network and compete for a block reward.
Exactly.
It serves zero other purpose. Mining does not necessarily take a part in the improvement proposal process.
Not in any more significant way than other full nodes.
So a miner does participate in that process, but a full node also participates in that process.
Exactly.
My full node that isn't energy intensive the same way that a miner would be can participate in that vote.
Exactly.
Okay. So my understanding isn't as broken as I thought. When you said that earlier, I was like, oh man, like I am embarrassed, right?
No.
Okay,
it's the full node concept is what's important. So
okay.
a full node. So let's say I'm the miner, and there's 5 full nodes out there, and I find a block, and I propagate that block to the network. All of those full nodes are validators in being able to say, oh, this looks right. So if you hear about a multiple confirmation process, all the full nodes are performing that confirmation process within the consensus mechanism.
Understood. And and I think we'll have to have someone on and talk about that more specific area, BIPs, Bitcoin improvement proposals, and the process through which they make their way into integrated part of the software, etc. But so let's just keep working with Matt here, because I really like working with Matt. Even though we're on different sides of the fence, me and Matt are able to have amazing conversations, and I think in the end, we'll see what happens, but I love working with people that we can talk despite being of different opinions. So, being priced out of the market, that's the downside of. What's the downside of being priced out of the market to you, Harry?
The downside to me is that it means that Bitcoin is properly difficult. So I think that like let's say the price of Bitcoin went to 50K. You know what would happen? A lot more miners would join, because a lot of 9-cent, 10-cent, 11-cent power would be profitable. So as much as it's frustrating to him on a personal level that he can't just participate openly, it's competitive. I can't go eat $100 steak every day because I don't earn enough money.
Yeah.
And so the same way that, maybe it's something I want, but it's not something I can afford, is a market mechanism, tale as old as time. I'd love to raise money against $100 billion valuation. I just can't find any investors.
So we're basically in agreement that this is not a fair competition. This is a competitive competition. And
so it's not fair in terms of it is not energy agnostic. So the price of energy is a key determinant to the winners and the losers in the competition.
Okay.
So as long so that to me is like the heart of what Matt's describing. And listen, I'm always here to have conversations with smart, good faith people. That's important to me and is very much what Grid is about.
Yeah.
The part about the electricity is that not all electricity is priced the same. The same as let's say I were starting a t-shirt company. I get economies of scale if I'm ordering 100,000 t-shirts rather than 10. So my access to cheaper t-shirt production, it gets lower the more that I buy. Same thing with energy. If I'm willing to sign a contract to consume 100 megawatts, at a time, I'm going to get access to a lower pricing schedule than if I'm consuming 1 megawatt. So these kind of tried and true economic forces like economies of scale, like the supply chain economics, they hold true. They're just operating in Bitcoin. That's just kind of the way that this marketplace functions.
So Matt's saying exactly economies of scale lead to centralization. Is that?
Well, yes and no. So economies of scale may lead to centralization, but each of these individual hubs of power doesn't make a meaningful impact on the total network hash. So, so let's say I were to max out 5 or 10 power plants, maybe then I would start to get close to a meaningful piece of the total network hash. But because there's so much computing power being contributed already, the ability to centralize computing power even around a single energy asset is really low.
Mm-hmm. And we're also talking on a global scale here. So I mean, is it possible for the world's richest individual to get the 5 energy companies, like you were saying, to solely back their project and completely shut out competitors? Let's say there was a legal scenario where that was allowed to happen. It's just really not feasible, or is that something that is in the back of your mind, or where do we stand on that?
Well, that to me is where you see multiple choke points.
Mm-hmm.
In the ecosystem. So maybe yes, you have energy producers who want to undercut the price of the electricity. They're representing an opportunity cost to do so. So their economics are probably pretty tough to convince them to do that in the first place. But assuming that they do, then they also have to develop a large enough supply chain to mine at a meaningful hash rate. So how do they get their hands on enough miners to do something meaningful? That's a really tough real world problem to solve.
Mm-hmm.
So I can appreciate that economies of scale means that it is hard to enter the marketplace, but like I don't think that it is. Listen, we're a mining startup. We're a young company.
Mm-hmm.
We had no problem entering this market, raising money through the normal process, the normal kind of way to go. We were able to enter this market. I'm sure that others have already and will continue to as the price of Bitcoin, continues to rise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're saying the barrier to entry isn't as significant as one would think. You're an average Joe that wanted to start mining, and you found the channels through which you can do so. You shook the right hands, and you found the right places to mine. As far as electricity costs are concerned, signed those contracts and created your success or your business. Now, so that's all good. We've kind of closed that, and let's. This is a good point. Are you aware, like, what's the best metric to measure global hash? Like, is there a site? A, and B, do you know off the top of your head, like, what percentage of hash does China own, or do you have is there a way we can quickly look at that, or is
yeah. Yeah. So the place where I go to blockchain.info to look at total network hash. I'll pull it up right now with you.
Blockchain.info.
I go over to data, and then I look at the data charts, and then
charts.
And then there's a section for mining information. It's the left-hand one, hash rate. So right now, it looks like it's roughly 44 million terahash per second. And that's down from an all-time high of 57.85.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this something that we can also see distributed by location?
So it's tricky. So then you go back to the mining information dashboard, and you see hash rate distribution.
Okay.
This is by pool. It's not by location.
Okay.
So you can basically say that we know Antpool and BTC.com are both Chinese pools. We don't know if the miners contributing to those pools are actually China-based or Chinese-controlled.
Interesting.
So
this
it's a
is
breakdown of
pools.
pool.
You can be a mining operation. Does this consider every operation as a pool, or is this like, are you excluded from this? Are you in like an other category or something?
No, so we are included in here. We are currently mining to a pool, but similarly, like look at the unknown category. That's an unknown.
Yeah, that's big. So, are you able to draw anything conclusive from that unknown, uh, that unknown space?
I mean, nothing particularly conclusive.
Nothing. It's not significant that 23% is unknown. That's not a good thing, not a bad thing. It's just it is what it is. Neutral.
Like before, I can make arguments both ways.
Okay. Okay. Understood. So
I
it's neutral.
can say unknown. Oh my God, there's a stealth miner who's looking to accumulate hash, or unknown. Great, there are people who believe in their anonymity and don't want to be associated with anything and are protecting their privacy and are doing so even through the mining process.
Yeah. So unknown is
meaningful. It's okay. Unknown.
Let's see. The pool operator determines which transactions are included in a block, right?
Yes.
Okay, Matt, we got an answer. If you have a follow-up, we'll be talking. Do you is there any other comment? Is this information something that we want to touch base on for a couple minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I just to touch on it, I think that some of the implication, what he's saying, could be, how do I know that a miner isn't going to, collude to exclude all the transactions from, whatever, Iceland. Sorry to pick on Iceland, but but how do we know that Iceland won't get blackballed? One that assumes that the addresses and the UTXOs that are coming from the Iceland addresses. But number two, it does allow for some bad behavior if there was meaningful centralization, But typically, in my experience and in our business, miners are economically motivated, so we prioritize the highest fees paid. So we set that parameter to say include fees based on the size of the fee in descending order.
So it's not like you're necessarily picking out transactions. You have some sort of protocol that says, hey, if someone wants a transaction to move immediately, they can pay a little bit more to be added to the top of the list.
Exactly. And so that creates fee competition.
Understood. And that would mean, I would assume that when you transact in Bitcoin, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to use one mining facility to do so. I would assume that would be a very competitive space.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. So as the main pool operators are located in the single geographic area, they could collude, right? Can they collude?
In theory, we haven't seen it in practice.
So in theory, yes, they can collude, but I would say, is it important to note that despite China's centralized hash, it's still multiple different pools and there's still the same amount of competition? Is there anything on a positive or negative scale that you want to add to that? I mean, obviously we're addressing elephants in the room. This isn't comfortable as a Bitcoin maximalist, but in order for Bitcoin to grow, these are the exact things that we need to do. We need to stop wearing our daisy goggles and we need to say, all right, here's the realistic picture, and if we don't like it, we need to change it, right? So, is there anything that you would say you don't like, or is there, on either side of the spectrum, are there good things about this, bad things? All I'm saying is that this is an academic space, and criticism is a double-edged sword, right? Constructive or destructive.
Totally. I think that I would love to see greater pool distribution geographically. I would feel better about the Bitcoin network with a greater distribution. I also think that there's a level of, what I don't think we're going to see are 500 pools. So the number of pools is less important to me, so long as they all kind of sit in this, sub 15, sub 12% kind of range, because you need enough pool centralization to give the miner predictable cash flows. So, so let's say you had 500 different pools, all equal hash rates, and I'm contributing hash to one of them. I may be stuck without hash for 500 blocks, which might be too long for me to properly have smooth enough cash flows to pay all my bills. So there's going to be a natural pull towards some centralization in terms of pool participation, just so that the miners can have this kind of predictable cash flows available to them. But there is also going to be a pull towards decentralization, because you don't ever want a single pool, or even, and it is a fair point, a single, geographical region or governmental jurisdiction to have so much hash within it. What I would say to push back against the Chinese pool location is that if we were to see bad behavior on the part of pool operators, many of the mining operations that are contributing hash would move their hash elsewhere. So there's a very low switching cost between moving hash. So if you were, and there are, tens of thousands of full node operators, so that type of behavior would be really quickly and easily detected. So if we were to see it, we would also probably see a very rapid migration of hash from Chinese run pools to non-Chinese run pools.
Yeah. And so, Viv, you bring up a good point. Matt, if you're able to jump in the show for a little bit, I can send you a link. We can, ask, 10, 15, 20 minutes worth of questions or, commentary. If you're able to do that, let me know. If Harry has the time, we can run this. What are we looking at, Harry?
10 more minutes.
Yeah, I got about the same. So, Matt, if you heard that, we both have things to do here in about 10 minutes. But if you could pop in, I'll send you the link right away on Twitter, and then we'll have you in here in seconds. So.
And I'm happy to do a follow up in the coming weeks. This is we love to talk about.
Yeah, and this is all very valuable information. Thank you, Crypto News. I totally agree. I'm learning too, very much. I think this is part of why I love my job, because I don't know it all, right? And I have the advantage of being able to say, hey, I don't know something. I want to speak to a specialist. That's my favorite thing. I'm proud to admit that I don't know everything. I love speaking to people that do know much more than I do. Okay, unfortunately, he can't join live right now, but we do have a couple more minutes. If there's something you wanted to throw, Matt did say, to be clear, I think a lot of these elephants in the room are very much theoretical threats, but these are often the sorts of criticisms leveled at XRP. And that's why I totally agree. After speaking with Matt, that's when I said, you know what? I got to take off my Daisy goggles because there are valid criticisms that need to be addressed. And if I'm going to be slinging mud at XRP, Ripple, then I need to be neutral in this space as a mediator, right? As a moderator. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I still think that addressing those elephants in the room is the only way to grow. And I think that psychologically one would argue that that's exactly the scenario, right? So,
it's a good point you're making. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm excited to see proof of stake in the wild now. Is that I'm a believer in proof of work versus proof of stake, but I'm most excited to see that play out in reality, not in the theoretical world. What I don't want to see is a math proof as to why one is better than the other. What I want to see is networks of tens of billions of dollars validating transactions via both mechanisms to see what wins.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Like that piece of it. So I'm really excited to see proof of stake launch, because I don't believe it'll win, but I want to know.
Yeah, like concrete. I want to know why it will fail, not just in theory. Understood.
Exactly.
Now we have a few more minutes. Matt said, if a mining pool and the actual miners can be very distinct, why is there not some large US-based pool or non-China based pool? Basically, why is there no competition? Why have Bitcoiners accepted this?
Challenge accepted. Grid pool is going to have to come and be the U.S.-based opportunity.
I'm hoping for that. I'm like, I'm raising my hand. I want it. Why hasn't that happened though, in your opinion, other than Grid? And that's GRIID, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have a .com? Is there anything?
Grid.com with 2 eyes. Okay,
grid.com, 2 eyes. Why don't you think why do you think the Bitcoin community has accepted this as a reality instead of said at 51% of mining pool operation and mining facility operation in China, said, "Hey guys, what the heck? We need to change gears here. We need Iceland step up, Canada, U.S., Mexico, everyone in the world, get your gears turning." Why hasn't that happened in your opinion?
Well, part of it is that for a pool to launch and have a credible amount of hash rate, it's kind of the 0 to 1 problem. So it's very hard to go from 0 to 1. It's a lot easier to go from 1 to 10, let's say. So so for a pool to attract enough meaningful hash at the network at the size that it is, for everybody who is just plugging in their garage miner and let's say BTC.com and Antpool were both live up and running in China at the time, it was easier to point it to the bigger pools because you would have a more predictable cash flow.
Yeah.
So those became the de facto pools to point your machines at. So they do have some legacy stickiness from being, obviously, reliable thus far, good behaviors.
It sounds like I don't know if I'm drawing an improper comparison here, but it's almost like that same kind of like legacy trusts or whatever is similar to like the criticisms of XRP's unique node list. And this, anyways, I think we can discuss this more in the future. Now, you said your mining operation is not part of is it part of an existing pool, or is this a fresh start and you're on your own doing a thing, or are you attracting other let's talk about that for a sec.
Yeah, so we currently mine to other pools.
You mine to other pools. What does that mean?
We use existing pools to get access to the block rewards that we're entitled to pro rata. And that's for the same reason, to keep our cash flow smooth. We have, it's an expensive operation to run. And so therefore we have to deal with that kind of business reality for the time being.
So is that pools that are allocating their hash to you type of thing, or is it backwards?
So let's use the example of Slush Pool. We'll contribute, X amount of hash, theoretical Slush Pool, and we receive our proportional share of the block reward from them.
Understood. Okay.
Over the longer term, we'll want to be a pool operator ourselves because we think it's a good business.
So you're diversifying now to have some sort of consistency, guaranteed consistency, while at the same time funding your operations and enhancing your own operations.
Exactly. So we believe once we're large enough, our ability to run our own independent pool will be viable. But until we reach the a sizable enough business, we need to rely on the steady cash flow streams of existing pools.
Well, it's not that. So Matt, I'm addressing what you're saying in the most recent thing. He didn't say that creating a pool is too expensive. He said that creating a pool it's a name brand situation where there's already a lot of hash being allocated to certain name brands, and so in order to get organized and build some sort of foundation and like a following, so to say, you need to start from the bottom and make your way up. So okay, so yeah, me and Matt, all right. So you're not seeing the comments here, but I think we're all in agreement here. And Matt is an excellent skeptic. Like I said, a very well-rounded individual. Might be a bit cheeky from time to time, and we have our laughs, and it's all good in the end. So let's see here. I think we're kind of hitting that 12:30 mark. I think this has been an amazing conversation. I don't. This is all stuff that I'm going to have to digest. I love this conversation. Very valuable information. We'll have to maybe even have to have a little conversation with the skeptic, and I'll be more of the moderator. And again, Matt's an excellent individual. As well as you, very informative, and I'm thankful for your time. Is there anything you'd like to add to the? Is there a cherry on top?
No, listen, we're in a brave new world. I think that having the opportunity to interact with these systems is the most exciting work I could possibly be focused on. I'm just grateful to be here, man.
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm gonna have you on again soon. I hope, man. So let's get these balls rolling, and I'm looking forward to more dialogue.
Come find me on Twitter.
For your time. Yeah, and I'll probably see you at the next event, anyways.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, well, I'll say my formal goodbye, and I'm gonna stay on for an extra minute for anyone that's in the chat. So thank you very much for your time, Harry.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Sounds good. Take care.
Bye.
So, yeah, Matt, I think I'm so happy you were able to pop in because, that's the thing is I can't always think of the criticisms because, you're thinking of 20 things at a time, it's always hard to, even a list doesn't help sometimes. But, yeah, there was a lot of fundamental education in the beginning, what mining is, what it does. There was a bit of a misunderstanding that mining does also contribute, as well as full nodes, to voting on Bitcoin improvement proposals. So where I initially thought it was only miners that had a say, it's actually miners and full node operators, which adds more voice to the mix. And Matt, we were talking about Bitcoin improvement proposals a little while back. Um, yeah, lots to absorb. Julia, I think I might even, I think I know which Julia you are on Twitter. Yeah, and so yeah, we talked about energy quite a bit, Matt. We hit about 3 solid points of electricity consumption, and we're obviously we can. There's so many more routes that discussion alone can go. I mean, that discussion can really go on a bit further, and so we probably will have time to do that in the future. Looking forward to having hopefully Matt. I do believe it said you're possibly willing to maybe we'll see in the future if you're able to enter the space and as an educated individual have some educated criticisms. I would look forward to that, and as you heard from Harry, he's most certainly willing to do that as well. So is there any questions for me in particular, anything that that you guys might need me to try to sum up, anything that I can do on my own? Yeah, this is we're making waves. I mean, the whole point, like I've said to a number of viewers, that the whole point of this is to create a two-way channel with the community, and it's going to take a while. Who knows? I mean, the XRP interview with Matt Hamilton had, I think, a pretty consistent 100 live viewers. That was really great. There weren't that many questions being asked, probably more comments, but we do want to have this academic discussion space. You guys let me know what you want me to, who you want, or what you want me to talk about, and I'll do the best that I can to get that topic live, so that we can have these two-way streets. I think it's so important to address community criticisms. There's so many brilliant people out there, and I love everyone's commentary. I love everyone's contribution. Obviously, like when it's not trolling, and I don't really deal with that too often personally, so I don't have much to say there. But I do love this two-way street. I love communicating with you all, and I love doing this for you, for us, and for the space. So I'm going to keep this, I'm going to keep this momentum moving forward. If you guys, any ideas you have, anything you want to discuss, happy to entertain. So I got to leave soon as well, so I'm probably going to tie this one up. Everyone, it's been a pleasure having you here, and I haven't received any questions, so hit me up on Twitter at Joe Saz underscore Saz, Joe at blocktv.com, and I'm happy to entertain any discussion in this space, and let's get to the bottom. Let's find the truth. So, all right, always a pleasure. This has been brought to you on behalf of Block TV, and this is Joe Saz. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the next one, guys. I'll keep you posted. Take care, everyone.